Honey, I can't breathe. Honey, I can't breathe. Honey, I can't see. Welcome to the first episode of Songwriting Tips and Chats with me, Nick Vulture. Yes, this is episode 1 of my new podcast that will bring to you ideas and thoughts and information around how to write your own original music, or even how to improve on your songwriting and the writing of your own original music. I would like to start by acknowledging that I am on the traditional lands of the Kaurna people of Adelaide, South Australia, and I pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. So who am I? You may wonder. My name is Nick Vulture. As I said, I am a singer-songwriter from Adelaide, Australia, and I was for a long time in a garage punk band called the Molting Vultures, 18 years of playing with a garage punk band. But I've been playing solo acoustic singer-songwriter music now for a few years, and that is the essence or the sort of fundamental discussion point or genre that I will talk to in these episodes in this podcast. So I'll be talking more about the approach to songwriting from a singer-songwriter, solo possibly, but definitely acoustic style genre, rather than how to write songs in the punk or garage punk genre. The goal of these sessions is really just to bring ideas to people who may be sitting at home and playing other people's songs or playing in cover bands or maybe even starting to write your own songs in your bedroom or your lounge room, but not really taking them out much to the public or putting them on show in any sort of recording format either. So this is for, I guess, aspiring songwriters. One of the things that I assume with this is that you know how to play in some way a musical instrument, because I won't be talking about how to play a musical instrument. This is not a music writing course. This is a bunch of ideas and thoughts around songwriting in particular. So that's the goal of this, to help you, the aspiring songwriter, to blossom with your songs and bring them out into the open and bring them eventually to the public. And so that's what I'll be working on in these podcasts. Now, I will also be occasionally bringing in guests to that effect as well. So you don't just want to hear my ideas, you need to hear the ideas and thoughts of other established songwriters and see what they have to say around some of the topics that I'm talking through. And some of those topics over the oncoming weeks will include storytelling and how to pick a story to write about, the use of language, the use of phrasing, the structure of songs. And then I'll start even getting into things like recording of songs and promoting your songs, and some of the do's and don'ts around songwriting and playing live shows as well and recording. So over the years, I've really built a list of do's and don'ts in music, and I'd like to share them with you as well. But the first few episodes will be really just focused on how to write a good song, and that will be what I'm here to talk to you about in the first few episodes anyway. These are just short sessions that I'll be doing on the podcast, and if you want more one-on-one sessions, more detail around some of these topics, you can contact me via my website, nickvulture.com, and there's a contact form on there. You just fill out an online form and submit it to say that you would like a one-on-one session around one of the topics or more of the topics, and we can do some more in detail or more complicated discussions around songwriting. So these are real light touch sessions on the podcast, just to get you stimulated with some ideas, and then we will open it up to one-on-one sessions if you're interested, just by contacting me on nickvulture.com. Okay, that's enough of the background and the context these podcasts, for these sessions. And what I'm going to talk to you about today is the first topic, which is how to pick a story, how to pick your storyline, how to pick a topic for your song. I think this is the number one fear for people who are not writing songs, or potentially are writing some songs but not putting them out in front of other people, is that there is a real fear around the validity or the value of the story. And that's a real fear. It's a scary thing to put your story that you've come up with in writing and in song out to the public. That's a real fear, and it's a very valid fear. So these sessions are really just what I've learned. There's more than one way to do this. There's more than a couple of ways. There's a lot of ways to write songs. And for every idea that I have, there will be other really good songwriters out there who will say, no, that's not right, or that's not how I do it. But that's okay. I don't think there's any right or wrong way to write songs. I'm just going to share with you what I've learned, and you can take what you want from it, pick and choose what you want. So pick up your guitar or pick up your piano if if you can, or whatever the musical instrument might be, and get writing. But really, how do you start? Where do you start? How do you pick a story? What do you talk about? So the first principle for me on picking a story is be honest. Like, honesty in songwriting is everything. My favorite artists, I guess, for this genre, for singer-songwriters, are people like Conor Oberst, Frightened Rabbit, Phoebe Bridgers, John Prine. Those sorts of songwriters, for me, there's a real sense of honesty in their stories. You know, there's nothing to you don't hear a lot of fiction, I don't think, in their music. Maybe occasionally, and maybe there's elements of fiction. I think there's always elements of fiction in every song, even when you're writing about something that happened to you. You know, it helps to sometimes fictionalize some of that, to give it a little bit of, to give a little bit of glitter, to add something to it. But honesty is the key. Not necessarily, I'm not talking now about being literal, like literally telling every step of the way of a story that you are thinking of, but it might even be occasionally a set of truths all compiled into one. So, for example, I want to take this song that I wrote called The Closer We Get. And The Closer We Get is a song that was about a not very nice road trip in leaving where I was living to come back home to where I belong. And it was a very difficult time. And The Closer We Get has a line, or has a verse that says, well, I'll play it for you now. We stopped for black coffee and some country town shopping in a place where we once came to play. And the streets were so wide and we laughed till I cried. You had to tell me that it was okay. So that was The Closer We Get. And what you heard there were the lines, we stopped for black coffee and some country town shopping in a place where we once came to play. The streets were so wide, we laughed till I cried. You had to tell me that it was okay. There's about 3 or 4 different truths in there. So the stop for black coffee, well, we stopped for coffee. It wasn't black. I used the term black coffee because it sounded better in the song, and that's a phrasing thing. And I'll talk more about phrasing in another episode. Some country town shopping. I didn't do any country town shopping in this particular town on this journey, but I had done it there before. So it's still connected to a truth for me, and it added to the story. In a place where we once came to play, I had played in this town before with another band. So again, another truth from another time, just linked it all up to add to the story. So even though these elements weren't true of the particular journey. They were true to me from particular times and from different times. So there's still a real honesty there. And the streets were so wide, we laughed till I cried. He had to tell me that it was okay. They were all true of that particular journey. So there is a real honesty in the songwriting, even though they're compilations of different truths. But it's still honest, okay? It's still it's honest in because I'm telling real stories. I'm not making up any of that. I'm compiling a couple of them into one, which is fine, but they come from a real place. And I guess that's the important thing. I have to admit, I'm going to be upfront here now. I'm not a big fan of fictionalized songwriting. I think only very, very, very good songwriters can tell a fictional story in a way that interests me. Now, music is subjective, and what we like is different. Everybody likes something a bit different, and some people love that sort of storytelling. But me personally, if I want a fictional story, I'll pick up a really good book and I'll read a really good fictional book. I'm not big on the songwriting that fictionalizes stories. It needs to come from somewhere. It needs to come from a truth. It doesn't necessarily need to be always my own personal truth either. It can be someone else's truth, and that's fine too. But honesty, for me, rule number one, be honest in your songwriting. Doesn't have to be your story all the time. It can be someone else's, and it doesn't have to be the same story in a linear way. You can compile different truths into a story. So good songwriters do that. All of those ones that I mentioned before that are influences on me, they all do all of them. I know that a couple of them also do tell fictional stories to a point, but I think a lot of songwriters, when you ask them about their songs, and I do this too, don't share the real truth behind the song. And that's because the truth is in the song. I hope that makes sense. The truth is in the song. Some of these truths are so awkward and so uncomfortable that the only place you feel comfortable putting them is in a song. So honesty, honesty, honesty. For me, particularly when you're starting your songwriting, don't fictionalize it. Don't make up stories. That's my advice. And my other piece of advice that I touched on there is be uncomfortable. Talk about things in your songs that are uncomfortable. If ever you're going to land those conversations, it's going to be in a song. This is your opportunity to get out some things and say it in a way that it may be, using some metaphors, and you may hide it a little bit, but you also want to show enough of it. You want to show enough of your hand so that other people can engage with it. The audience can hear it and relate to it. So there's a little bit of like treading some water there. You're partly hiding it but partly not. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. Talk about in your songs what's uncomfortable to talk about in real life. Okay, be uncomfortable. So be honest, don't fictionalize, and be uncomfortable. That's what I will say about picking a story. Okay, now that doesn't necessarily tell you how to kickstart it, right? That just gives you some principles. So I want to give you a tip as to how I kickstarted my first solo song. And that was, I grabbed a couple of sayings that were popular sayings or sayings that I heard other people say, right? So, for example, my first song was called Perfect Storm. And perfect storm is a saying. People often, mention that something is that happened to them was a perfect storm. And by that, they mean, it was a bad thing at the time, but it actually worked out for the good, right? So it was the perfect storm. Yeah, and at the time, a couple of years ago, that saying was being used a lot, just in general day-to-day life, in general sort of, media or political narratives or whatever it might be. And it was a saying that was floating around a bit. And I thought it's a really good saying to build a platform for a song. And then I started to build various truths around the saying perfect storm. So I built a story around, a hard and difficult relationship, partly was personal, partly was other people's, and possibly a little bit of fiction. So I'm going back a little bit on what I said, but more just personal and other people's stories. I sort of mixed them all in, but I used that metaphor of a storm all the way through the song. So you blew right in like a hurricane is the first line, right? So and I use that all the way through the song. The comparison of a relationship with a storm, and I just built off of and around the saying perfect storm. All right. So here's the fourth tip, right? Grab a saying, find a saying. It doesn't have to be a popular saying. It doesn't have to be something from pop culture. It doesn't need to be something that the media is using, like I did with Perfect Storm. It can just be a saying that you heard someone mention, at work or on the bus or whatever. Like, listen out, listen to to things that people say. Listen for interesting grabs of what people might say, or there may even be something that you use quite regularly in day-to-day life that you would like to turn into a song. But remember, once you've got your saying, build around that, build the comparisons and build the metaphors around that saying. Don't lose track of the saying, and remember, be honest to the saying as well. Be honest in the storytelling, whether it be your story, other people's stories, or a combination of things, okay? As you start to get better with your songwriting, you can build in more fiction, but be careful. I say to you, be very careful about too much fiction. And don't, the other thing about when you personalize the story and you're being honest is that you do need to keep in mind a little bit the way that you're telling it, so that it can be considered universal, right? So universal storytelling is important too. Don't get too literal about your story or someone else's story in your honesty, at least initially. Keep it sort of a little bit higher level so that people can relate to it themselves. One of the great things about songwriting is when someone shares with you what your song meant to them. And what is even better is when what it meant to them is completely unrelated to what it meant to you when you wrote it. I think that is very powerful. If someone can turn what you've said into themselves, into their own story, and it's not what you were talking about at all, then you've just written a good song. So, honesty, don't fictionalize, be uncomfortable, and use sayings. Kickstart your story with some sayings or with a saying, and try and be universal in the way that you tell the story. Try and make it relatable to anyone and everyone. Okay, there's some tricks in there, so take your time. One of the good things about songwriting is you can take your time with them. You can edit them. You can come back and change them. Right. Also, it's a bit of a fine line that you don't want to over edit it or overthink it either. So, but initially, just get it down. And you can come back and edit it later. But I don't want to jump too far ahead. That's going too far down the track. All I'm trying to do right now is to get you to think about a story. So before I do the next podcast, if you're really keen on writing a song, think about the story and some of the things I've told you, right? Think about honesty, whether it be your story or someone else's story or a combination of stories or a combination of events. It doesn't matter, but be honest. Don't lie. Don't make them up. You can compile them however you like in a way that's interesting, but don't fictionalize either, not yet. Come back to fictionalizing later. Write about things that are uncomfortable to you, right? So think about something that's uncomfortable. Write it down on a bit of paper. And maybe put what's a saying next to that. What's a saying that you know that can relate to that, like perfect storm, right? So put that down next to uncomfortable. What's uncomfortable, and then saying. and then start to build the idea, start to build the story. Don't worry about verses and choruses and bridges, and we'll talk about that later. Just come up with your idea. That's lesson 1 for today. That, I think, will kickstart you into how to grab your first story, to write your first song, or to write your first better song. Okay, so that's it for now. I thank you for joining me on my first episode of Songwriting Tips and Chats with Nick Vulture. And remember, we can do lessons. If you want that and you're interested in that, we can Zoom and we can do more of this, and we can talk about this more, and I can help you more. We can do some one-on-one. So you can contact me, like I said, nickvulture.com. And also, while you're at it, have a look around my website, have a look at my music on Spotify or whatever your platform might be, Bandcamp, etc., and have a listen and see what you think. And you'll get a sense of what I do with my songwriting. So that's it for now. Thank you very much, and looking forward to episode 2, where I will progress this idea of songwriting to the next level. Speak then.